Hello, friends. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I am excited to have a special guest with me today, a gentleman who I've known for a little while here and who I've been following for quite some time. His name is Dr. Luigi Boccuto, and he's a research scientist at the Greenwood Genetics Center in South Carolina. So, Dr. Boccuto, it's so nice to have you with me today to talk about a couple of different subjects and share with my audience. I know they're going to be very interested in hearing what you have to say, and it's good to see you again. We met, actually, it's funny, we met on my birthday in June in New York City. You happened to be in New York for a conference, and I was there to take off for London the next day. So it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, and thank you for this invitation, this opportunity. It's nice, very nice to be here and have a chance to talk a little bit with you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's you've been doing a lot of really interesting work. I'm on YouTube a lot, watching videos. I love the TED Talk. The personalized medicine is beautiful. That's nice, and a lot of other videos I've seen too. And one of the things I wanted to talk with you about today, and you and I kind of talked a little bit off camera first, is there's a community out there that I think is stereotyped, and that would be, for lack of better ways to say this, I don't know if I'm politically correct or not, but let's say people with autism, and the how people view autism, what they think of it, how they define it in their minds. And having known many people with autism and actually working with some as clients in the fitness industry, I find that you have a phrase, I'm going to steal it from you because it's actually something Michael J. Fox says, because I work a lot with people with Parkinson's. He said, if you met a person with Parkinson's, you met a person with Parkinson's. And your spin on that is, what, if you can share that with us?
Sure. I don't owe any rights on that sentence, so there's no problem with that. But really, that can be adapted to the world of autism, and the thing is the same. If you see a patient with autism or a person with autism, you've seen one person with autism, and that is really the paradigm of the diversity that characterize this group of individuals. And in fact, nowadays, the most recent definition only expresses the definition of diagnosis as a spectrum. There is only one entity called autism spectrum disorder that encompasses a huge variety of behavioral issues. So the common trait for this condition is a cluster of three core symptoms. There are impairments at the social level, there are problems in verbal and non-verbal communication, and there are a series of stereotyped and limited interests. And of course, the degrees of severity that could characterize these three core symptoms may vary tremendously, as well as they may vary the correlate comorbidities. So there are patients with autism that present with other medical conditions. There are patients with autism that have only slight behavioral issues. So we are talking about a large group of individuals that might have several types of problems. And as you said, we are encountering now at the social level some sort of stereotype that a person with autism sometimes receives some social stigma. And when in fact, there are people with autism that are quite functional, they're quite capable of interacting in a social environment, although with some limitation, but they are autonomous, they are able to take care of themselves. And I think that in order to provide a better, more personalized approach and management to this individual, is very important to characterize their their condition, their phenotype, both at the molecular level, at the clinical level.
Okay, interesting. I know that, well, we're humans. Every human is different, right? Every person with Parkinson's is uniquely affected differently. Um, I've known people diagnosed with autism who are nonverbal, need a lot of help and assistance and caring for themselves. To the other end, whereas they're highly, they socialize well, function very, like you say, autonomous. They can take care of themselves pretty well, if not completely. Um,
Yes.
so I have a question for you. So I'm just going to take a turn here and go down a path. One thing I've noticed, and I'm curious about this. Do you find that there is a common thread of, let's say, any type of sensory variance with them as compared to, let's say, you or me? And what I mean by that is, let's
Yes.
say, sense.
Yes.
I can give you an example. I could say to one of my people I work with, drop and give me 50 push-ups. Okay. And then I could say, after 10, 20, 30, do you feel the burn? And the answer is, I don't know. So what I always wondered about that is what's going on there, because I want to be able to work with this person and make sure I'm not going to hurt them or injure them, but I want to challenge them. And I've wondered if it had anything to do with uh, the nervous system and messages to the brain, or interpreting the feeling of a burn, if you know what I mean.
Yes. So there are two levels of um, we could call them one level is perception. So there is an abnormal threshold in their sensory system. And another level is the processing, the elaboration of the sensorial stimulation and the output signal. So that the message that they are elaborating to explain what they feel. So
Okay.
if we can start from the first, a lot of people with actually have abnormal sensorial responses. What does that mean? Basically, what is for us a regular stimulation from the outside world, it could be a visual stimulation or a sound stimulation or tactile stimulation. We perceive that, we elaborate, and we process that, and we acquire the information. For some people with autism, that same input, that same amount of stimulation is perceived as disturbing. It's something that hits the threshold of discomfort. In fact, there are some movie theaters that are autism friendly. So they have some devices that allow to watch the movies, but with buffered sounds, with dimmed lights. So basically, a kid with autism that wants to see a superhero movie would be in a lot of discomfort, almost close to the pain threshold when exposed to big explosions, very violent sounds, very, flashy lights. It will be something that will create some discomfort at the physical level. And that is because in many individuals, the sensorial system is set on parameters that are slightly different from the parameters that you and I have.
Okay.
It might be related to the fact that might have some inflammation going on. So the level of response in their neurons is set up a little higher or lower, depending how we look at that. So that is the first thing, the fact that they process the input of the sensorial information in a different way than we do. Okay. And then there is the output. The output is more related to their communication issues. So when you ask, do you feel the burn? Has this person ever been exposed to what you call burn? Do you know if he has been trained to learn what are his physical limits? or when he was young, he did play some sort of sports up to an agonistic level. So do you know if person has ever felt what you consider burn in his life? Do you want to say? Because
yeah,
do not work with the same conventions that we do. And in some cases, when you ask a person with autism, do you feel the burn? He's going to look for fire, because they are very literal.
Yeah, yes, I've noticed this.
It's but they do have this sort of interpretation. And the typical example that I like to cite is a character from a TV series, Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. Sheldon is an example of a patient with mild autism, but very high functioning, what one time could have been diagnosed as Asperger's syndrome. And a typical example of that is that Sheldon doesn't get sarcasm. So if you say something, but really hinting to something else, he will rely to what is coming out of your mouth.
Yes.
So there are some episodes when, his friend has to show up a sign and say sarcasm, like, consider he doesn't have, in the processing. So I'm just saying this because I'm sure that person,
Yeah.
Just saying this because I'm sure that person, is fully functional, think that they're on fire, literally.
Yes, so that's really interesting. That's really interesting. We've talked, a couple of people I've worked with. I've noticed for sure, sometimes joking around doesn't work too well unless you explain that it's a joke, and sarcasm.
Yes,
that could be part of the joking too. Yeah, very, very literal, which I find very interesting too. This is a kind of a side note here. There was a point at one point where one of my friends, who I work with, he was telling me things that he was doing. And I couldn't believe he was actually doing the things he said he was, some personal things. And then I talked with his mother, and she said, well, he really doesn't have the capability of lying. So he wouldn't lie to you about anything because he just doesn't think along those lines. And I actually had never thought about that. I don't know if this makes sense at all, but then it made me realize, okay, wait a minute.
Yes.
He doesn't even, there's no logic behind lying. And that's what he would tell me. He says, there's absolutely, why would you do this? There's no reason to.
Yes. Yeah. One extra step in the evaluation of a notion of a concept that they lack. So they do not see a practical advantage in lying, and they value the original structure of the concept because it's true.
Yes.
And there is, another thing that sometimes is not considered well enough is that individuals with autism don't work well when they do not have all the information. So if you change a concept or a notion, and you alter the reality by telling a lie, you set off their parameters because things don't match anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing, they tend to stick to the truth because it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That totally makes sense. And when I talk about this too, it's not like they were big lies. I thought they were just little things that maybe, didn't want to admit or whatever. No, it was just, I really learned a lot. I've learned a lot from one person in particular who I work with, who's a very dear friend now. And I've also learned more from him than just about anybody also, because perspectives, especially when it comes to certain political things and other things, let's say disability rights, things like that, discrimination. I have learned so much. My world has expanded tremendously because I could not possibly have thought along those parameters, unless somebody taught me how, and this person has. It's been very interesting. I really enjoy it.
There was one more thing to discuss about the exercise therapy. Mentioned that when we talked about sensorial dysfunction, sometimes we forget an important organ of sense, which is the skin, the tactile sense.
Sure.
And a lot of patients with autism suffer with the function at that level too. So how can you make an example of that? Well, for example, they do not tolerate tight clothes. They like to wear very loose clothes because having something that is consistently operating some pressure, some friction on their skin makes them really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
This is because, once again, their threshold of tolerance is set off compared to ours. So if we sometimes can enjoy, some, tight pants or a button-down shirt that is, right fit and so on, they would go crazy with that.
Sure.
Because the feeling of that clothes pushing on their skin constantly is perceived as discomfort, almost as pain.
Yes.
So on one side, we have a lot of individuals with autism that suffer of motor disorders, sometimes gross motor disorders or fine motor disorders, and they would benefit from physical therapy, from intervention. It's something that has been proved actually that has one of the best efficacy rates if it has initiated very early. On the other hand, however, we have to consider that in these type of patients, the type of intervention has to be personalized. So
yeah.
to give you an example, the type of manipulation that you can do to fix some joint stiffness cannot be the same in a patient with autism, because maybe that patient has some tactile hypersensitivity.
Yes.
So he doesn't want to push on his knee, on his shoulder, or something like that, even if he's for his own good.
Yeah, thank you for saying that too. And I'm one of the things I'm so glad about is we're able to talk about this because I have a pretty large audience of personal trainers who watch this series on YouTube, and physical therapists all over the world. And it's very, very helpful to know these things. I certainly have run into just about everything you're talking about with my own clientele, except I've learned a lot today about what's going on and some of the reasons for different things. But I've noticed too that the tactile thing, even where sometimes you may want to cue somebody, maybe it's a tap on the shoulder just to have them stand up straighter, that may not be cool. I mean, I always ask first anyways, no matter who it is. Can I touch your shoulder? No. Or yes. I know if I can't with certain people, and I notice that touching is it can be very almost frightening for certain people with autism.
Yes.
So you have to be very careful not to cross the boundaries there of causing discomfort. And of course, with the manual manipulation too, like you're saying, every person's different, so you have to personalizing. Oh, I couldn't agree more. That's brilliant. It's so necessary and important to personalize. Yes.
Yeah. And again, there are levels related to social interaction. They have their own world and they don't let anybody get too close to touch them. It's destabilizing for them. And there is the discomfort related to the sensorial impairment.
Yes. Yeah, really interesting. I'd like to ask another question too. This I learned from a parent of somebody I've worked with. Had something to do, if I remember what she said correctly, about during early years of life, midline of the brain, something going on there where there were connections that were not formed. Am I on track with something there?
So abnormalities in the have been described in many patients with autism. And once again, there is a diversity of abnormalities that been described in the literature. There are some areas that are at the base of the brain that seem to be more commonly affected. For example, the hippocampus is one area that is supposed to be involved in the regulation of instincts, very basic emotions, and abnormalities at the neuroanatomical level in that area have been reported in a large number of patients. Once again, there are patients that show no abnormalities whatsoever. And there are patients that show abnormalities in other areas of the brain. For example, the cerebellum that is involved in motor. So that explains why some patients, like we said before, do have some coordination impairment that goes with their behavior. But cerebellum has also been involved in the so-called process of emotional learning. So having are you there? Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
Having in that area might actually lead not only to motor impairment but also to impairment in neurobehavior.
Okay. Yeah, really interesting. I've noticed other things too, like coordination, balance, hand-eye coordination. A lot of times is not the same. Maybe difficult to, play baseball, for example, a wiffle ball and a bat, and do some hand-eye or just anything. So, for the personal trainers who are out there watching, my recommendation is, as I always say with everybody, learn your client, learn your patient, and work towards their needs based on who they are and what you can do with them, where they're going to be comfortable, yet you can still be hopefully effective. Because crossing boundaries into discomfort, whether it's tactile, emotional, anything like that, we have to stay away from that. So it can be a learning curve. It's a learning curve as to each person and what we do, but over time we can help. So with their fitness, let's say, or their physical therapy needs.
Yeah, I think that point, one of the most important, that maybe might require a little extra time at the beginning, but it will pay off on the long term, is to have the patient getting comfortable, getting adjustment with the environment where the therapy occurs. Because it's already a big adjustment, almost a shock, to take an individual with autism and introduce them in a new environment. Then to expect that individual will perform at his best in a new environment, it's asking a little too much. So maybe that requires a little bit of patience, a little bit of a different approach to allow the individual to get familiar with the environment, to spend some time touching things around, experiencing the differences, sizing up his new space. And once he processes that new space, then he can have his body operating properly, or as proper as possible, because we do have some impairment, but he can have his body operating properly in the new environment. Otherwise, he will have already a limitation that comes from the novelty of the environment.
Sure, yeah, and I've noticed anxiety can be very present, and so like with anybody, we want to create a relationship based on actual, sincere, genuine caring, because I care, I want to help them, but that also involves understanding them, learning them for every person. And everyone's going to go at their own pace. Some people are ready to rock and roll in the first 2 minutes. And sometimes I know I've actually just, on occasion, I'll just have just a conversation for a visit or two before we do anything, because comfort is so important, trust is so important, respect. You have to respect this. So Yeah, your information is so helpful. I know that the trainers, physios out there watching, I'm sure that they're learning a lot because, um, I travel all over the world. I don't meet a lot of people who work with the autistic community in this capacity as a trainer or a physio. So you appreciate very much everything that you're sharing with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Now, if you don't mind, just for just a few minutes, just a short few minutes, there's actually another topic I had on my mind. It's completely different. But first, if there's anything more you wish to share about the previous topic, just let me know. Um, if you have any words of wisdom there that you didn't say that you'd like to share, go for it. But I do want
No,
to talk about the alcohol and liver thing that we talked about yesterday texting.
yeah.
Oh,
Again,
great.
it's another another of the diversity of interaction of what we're made of, our genes and the environment. And I think that we're learning a lot more now that we have tools for large scientific analysis, like analyzing the whole genome or the whole proteome, the the totality of the proteins or the metabolic pathways. We're learning more about how little things in self can predispose to interact in different ways with the environment. And when it comes to liver, one of the most critical environmental factors is alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol could be, if could have some positive effect in our body if taken with moderation. Unfortunately, especially in some individuals with genetic predisposition, the assumption of alcohol can lead to very deleterious consequences. But knowing that in advance is actually extremely important, because we cannot change yet how we are made. We cannot. There are now some technologies that allow what is called genome editing, so correcting some mistakes in our code of life, but they are not as developed yet to be available on a large scale. However, until we will be able to change our genome, we can change the environment around us. So we can limit the assumption or eliminate the assumption of alcohol in order to prevent the deleterious impact of the environmental factor. And for example, I've been lucky enough to collaborate with some colleagues and friends in the United States and in Italy. We worked on the effect of certain gene variants on different types of liver disease. There is alcoholic and non-alcoholic liver disease, and there are gene variants that predispose either to the first one or the second one. But there is also one gene variant, and is the only one so far, that has been associated to both alcoholic and non-alcoholic liver disease. So it's interesting to learn how the dynamic of the interaction between the genome and environment actually determines our health. And for example, the clinical consequences of this is that if two people that are exposed to the same environment, so the same diet, the same amount of alcohol, and other environmental factors such as cigarette smoke and so on, if one of these persons carries that variant, it has a much higher risk of developing fat liver or steatosis, and to have that progressing to steatohepatitis, to
Wow.
chronic hepatitis, and cirrhosis. So, it's like when we talk, and with colleagues and friends, say, well, I eat exactly the same as my wife, but I gain weight, she doesn't. It must be in my genes. This is a simplified, interpretation, but there is some truth. there are clearly some predisposing factors in our metabolism that allow us to metabolize better or worse certain nutrients. And when it comes to alcohol, unfortunately, alcohol can be deleterious at multiple levels in the liver. We talked about these variants might affect the accumulation of fat in
Yes.
the hepatocyte, the liver cells. Other variants may play a role in the inflammatory status. So they might actually trigger inflammation in the liver or at systemic level, the presence of certain environmental factors.
Okay. So there's some information I've been researching for a while. Some I learned from our mutual friend, Dr. Alfonso Fasano, and then other people, and research, some of the medical research out there. For example, if you take identical twins, who there's a study, and there's this one study of 100 identical twins where one has Parkinson's and one doesn't. And in this one particular study, 97, I believe, of the twins who had Parkinson's had long-term exposure to some toxin or they were in an environment that the other one was not exposed to. And therefore, the research is they're looking at it as like a genetic predisposition combined with exposure can, I don't know the correct medical terminology, but turn the gene on or cause it to mutate and cause a disease. So I imagine that with alcohol, for example, would that be similar?
Yes.
It seems like that's kind of what you were saying here a little bit ago, is we're looking at a similar type of thing.
Exactly. So this is what is part of the so-called epigenetic regulation. The epigenetic is everything that still affects the function of the gene, the level of expression and interaction, but it does not affect the sequence.
Yep. Okay.
That is why it's genetic. So it doesn't change the sequence, but it does change the modulation of the activity of the gene.
Oh, wow.
So what I mentioned before is one step back, which is the genetic regulation. So those are variants that we have congenitally. So we are born with that, and they will not change. So it's important that we can take that into account when we modulate the environment around us, because we can change. We can change the level of alcohol that we assume. We can change the type of drugs that we take, but we cannot change our DNA yet, at least.
Okay. Interesting. Very, very interesting. I'm just actually trying to think of what else would I ask you about this, because I find it to be fascinating that, we're learning all this information about genetics, genes, just all the stuff that you look at, that you're researching at the genetics center there. I just think it's fascinating. So let me ask you this, for people who consume alcohol, do you have any recommendations for them in any way, shape, or form? Just any words of wisdom you'd like to share about any precautions they should take?
Well, first of all, knowing a little bit of their family history. If they have family members that have suffered of alcohol-related disorders, there might be a genetic predisposition running in the family to suffer of this sort of disease. So that has to be taken into account. Second, of course, excessive assumption of alcohol is never too good. So there are people that have a chronic problem, and that has to be managed in the proper terms. So to go and see, maybe, to seek for assistance for that.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, the golden rule is that really our diet is our first line of defense of our health.
Sure.
By regular diet and the proper amount of exercise, we can really take good care of our body. The amount of information that we're gathering nowadays with these new technologies, with these new instruments that science is providing us, is actually adding even more value to this statement, because we do know now that what we assume, what we introduce into our body has some effect, not only in terms of providing energy source or source of hydration of minerals, but also to regulate, like you mentioned, the function of certain metabolic pathways, to regulate the activity of certain genes. So it has some short and long-term effects, and we need to take that into account. We need to know that we're responsible for the way we treat our own body.
True.
So having a regular diet, a good food hygiene or life hygiene, when you introduce exercise, is critical, not only to feel good at the moment, but also to preserve our health on the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see also with people, and I'm one of these people, it's very, well, let's just say it's not uncommon for me to wake up and just feel sad. I have no reason to be. My life is very good. I'm surrounded by great people, family. Although it is really doom and gloomy here and rainy and snowing and dark. But I know this. If I just get started moving, and I teach this at workshops all over the world, just get started. Like nature's antidepressant for me is exercise. It might just be a get out the door and just walk fast or run or something, go to the gym. And I feel better. And then I'm not sad for the rest of the day. It happens every time. So I just get started. Because otherwise, in the days when I didn't used to get started and I weighed a lot more, I was very big, I had some health problems that were not good. So it's an interesting thing how all of our systems are connected. Our body with our emotions and our psychological state, our mental, our cognitive ability. It's fascinating.
Yes, and exercise positive impacts on many levels. On the cardiocirculatory level, on the immune level. It strengthens our immune defenses, and like you said, on the mood and behavior.
Yeah.
So the personalized approach. There are people that might need to run, 5K every morning. There are people that take that into jogging, but it depends. You need to find your own dimension, and you need to stick with that.
Yeah, exactly. We have to find what works for us. Well, I appreciate this second topic too about the alcohol, the liver, and the whole genetic thing. I think it's so important, and we could go down another rabbit hole here, which I won't because I don't know enough to talk about it. But even when we talk about dietary things, no matter what it is, liquids or solids, things we can put in our body that cause inflammation that then cause other problems. I was just reading this book here. Dale Bredesen, a neurologist from, I'll just show it here, The End of Alzheimer's, Dr. Dale Bredesen, and I actually met him last year, and we had lunch, and he talks about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's living here for 10 to 20 years before it gets here, and it's like, whoa, who knew? I didn't know that till I met him.
In fact, there is a further connection nowadays, and that is the so-called microbiota. All the organisms, all the bacteria that live in our body, mainly in our intestine, may actually play a role in some neurodevelopmental disorders, or in some neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson or Alzheimer's, because a lot of nutrients are filtered through these bacteria, and like in our intestinal flora, and the type of bacterial strains that are present in our organism determine the levels of availability of certain compounds, but also determine the presence in our body of certain byproducts that might be more or less toxic. So there is a lot going on that we're learning nowadays.
Yeah.
And once again, is making us appreciate even more the impact of our diet and our lifestyle.
I'd say it's incredible. I'm glad you brought that up. I wouldn't have thought of that in this particular conversation, but a person that Alfonso Fasano works with, his name is Tony Lang. Do you know Tony Lang, neurologist?
No, honestly.
He's also, I've met Tony when I was there last year visiting Alfonso, and I was just watching a video he put out of a speech, a presentation. He talks about the liver and Parkinson's, and I didn't even know there's dopamine can be produced by the liver, in addition to other places. But all this stuff, what you're sharing here, and all these things are so fascinating. It really gets me thinking more and more and more about people I work with, myself, what I'm putting in my body. Because I'm 57 and I want to live another 57 years functionally. You know, I don't want to be sick. I just don't want to be sick.
Understandable.
Yeah, and draining the system, you know, I mean, there's time and place for everything, but I don't want to be burdening people, so I need to take responsibility. So that's what my goal. Well, this is very, very interesting. Anything more that you want to say about any of that before we close out?
No, I think we covered a lot, but as I said before, if you receive some feedback or some questions, I'm available for some follow-up. So.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, yeah. If I get questions, I'll definitely find a way for whatever you're best with communicating with people, and we'll connect you with them. But Luigi, it's been great, man. It's really good to see you again. I hope to see you in person again sometime soon. Eventually, my son is in Atlanta right now doing his residency, so he'll be there at least 2.5 more years. So one of those times I go to see him, I'm going to drive over and see you, because it's really not that far.
Sounds good.
So if you'll stay on with me, but I'm just going to close out here and thank you again for sharing with us. Really, really appreciate your time and your knowledge and the willingness to share. Right. Personal trainers, physiotherapists, anybody else watching. It's been really interesting for me, and as I talk about at the end of every interview, you know, seek to grow and expand your knowledge base and your skill set so you can be better for the people who you want to be working with. And also know that there are many different demographics and many populations you can work with and you can be effective. You know, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, MSA, autism, all kinds of things. But it's the whole personalized, well, medicine or physical therapy is so important for people, and thanks to Luigi, we learned a lot more about that today. So seek to grow, expand your skill set. Thank you, Luigi. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and have a fantastic day.